You buy Bitcoin, you hold it for more than 4 years, Joe. That's my advice to everybody.
Fair to say you simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally.
I'm very bullish on the long-term viability of Bitcoin.
I was going to say, did that surprise you?
That surprised me how much that's gone up.
Hey, Internet, welcome back to another episode of New Foundations, the podcast brought to you by Acropolis, the Bitcoin Treasury company. Here this week with my co-founder Chase and special guest Bram Kanstein. He is the host of the Bitcoin for Millennials podcast, which has been growing like crazy recently, so congrats on that. And he also joined Onramp as the head of growth. So very excited to have him in the general ecosystem and to have him on the show today.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
Welcome. So we were just talking before we hit record. We want this episode to be a bit of a macro update or an end of the year recap, sort of what we've been through this year and what we have to look forward to in 2025 in terms of just broader Bitcoin and corporate Bitcoin adoption, since we like to focus on treasuries for the show. Before we do that, I would like to give the audience a bit of a background on you. So if you could just tell us about yourself, how you got involved in Bitcoin, and what you're really focused on now.
Yeah, so my background, I always summarize it, is in early stage product and business development, not in the business development in the classical way, but I spent a lot of time at kind of like the in like the 0 to 1 stage of new businesses. So any creative or entrepreneurial person has a lot of ideas. I mean, you can probably recognize that, right? But how do you validate those ideas? How do you set up the foundation of a business? How do you eventually grow it? That's always kind of interested me ever since I was 12 or 13, being on the computer, having the first time having internet at my home. I always just love to try out new products and technology, basically, and kind of discovering like what are people working on, like what are they spending their time on, why do they think this is a good idea. And this is something that I did not realize, of course, when I was 12, but later on I realized, that is what I like to spend my time on. I think that's also where I get lots of inspiration from. I like to really dive deep into topics or new products and try to see how they work, why they eventually succeed or fail. And that's kind of been like the main theme throughout my career, I think, over the past 10, 12 years. So I've seen the 0 to 1 phase from multiple angles, from the investor side to bigger companies, also traditional finance. I've spent a few years in banking. I had my own growth marketing agency. And of course, at one point I thought, okay, well, I think I know how to validate and grow business ideas, so why not attempt some of my own? I failed at a lot, I think like over 20, 25 ideas, but a few also worked out. So I eventually sold 5 of the things that I made. And of course, if you are on the internet looking for new stuff, then you come across Bitcoin. So I discovered Bitcoin in 2013. I always say, I bought at 300 and I sold it all at 4,000. As with a lot of people, I think, you get into it, you don't really understand it, and you sell it and you're happy. And then once you realize what it is, you're like, okay, I should have done more homework because now I have less Bitcoin than I had before. But I think it's part of understanding what absolute digital scarcity actually means. I had a large portion of my time also spent in crypto, of course. I think that's also part of it. Like, you got to shitcoin before you Bitcoin. Because I was drawn in, I think, mainly from like the technology side, so I think in that sense, the narrative around crypto is pretty interesting. So I participated in the whole ICO wave and NFT wave and all that stuff. My interest in Bitcoin over years, like up and down, and I now understand that this is the only thing I should focus on. I think the past 2-3 years, I've been just just heads down, only Bitcoin. I read about Bitcoin every day. I think about Bitcoin every day. I talk about Bitcoin every day. And then like, I think 18 months ago, I was like, okay, I really want to contribute something to the space. And that's kind of where the idea for my podcast came about. So I call it Bitcoin for Millennials because, well, you two will probably agree. I think this is the ultimate savings technology and the ultimate tool for our generation to actually build and secure our future. So where the boomers had real estate and the Gen Xers had the S&P 500, I think Bitcoin is the perfect asset for us to help us build towards our future. And I think we are especially predispositioned to understand this thing that connects like the physical and the digital world. So yeah, it's the only thing I think about. And it was actually a boomer that helped me get over the line. I don't know if you know Bob Burnett. He's a boomer BTC on Twitter. And I heard him say in another podcast, like, this is the biggest technological discovery of your life. And there's basically nothing else that, there's nothing more important that you could dedicate your time to. And when I heard that, I realized, I'm going to think about this for the rest of my life. So I need to double down and just go all in on this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting, this idea of Bitcoin for Millennials, the name of your podcast, and this opportunity that this in particular generation of millennials has in front of it, where a lot of the boomer generation perhaps thinks that the millennials are going to come and pay 10x the price of the houses that they bought. And I think that they're going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening when they realize that millennials who have found Bitcoin would perhaps rather just rent and own Bitcoin as their store of value or their form of property. So I'd love if you could maybe peel back that layer of the onion a bit more. So why is it that millennials are perhaps in this unique position where all of these other asset classes that the generations ahead of us had invested in have kind of taken off, kind of maybe benefited from the money printing over the last few decades, and now millennials are supposed to come in and kind of be that bag holder that comes and gives them that exit liquidity, but perhaps that's not going to be the case. What's going to happen if Bitcoiners don't bail out the boomers in these expensive homes and other property?
Very good point. I think there's a few things there, right? So everything that we've been taught to do, right, when we would grow up, and most millennials are now in an age where they are settling down, starting a family, maybe growing a family. They are at a certain steps in their career to like level up or like really decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So there's big things happening, in this life phase between 28 and 42. Basically, you're making big decisions, which create a path for you towards your future. Of course, the future is uncertain for everyone, but once you make big decisions, for example, where do I start a family? That is a certain path towards that future. So you want some sort of certainty around that for you to make that decision. And so that's just a life phase that we're in. But like the things that are these big decisions, right? Like, do I buy a house? Do I get a child? Do I relocate for a certain job, for example? What we've been told or have been sold, I do air quotes, but by our parents or our grandparents is like, this is just the way it goes, right? You buy a house maybe when you have your first job, or eventually you buy a house, and then if you get a relationship, you both sell the house, and then you get a house together, whatever that narrative is that has been told to you. But as you said, Chase, like the homes went up in value because the money has gone down in value, right? The homes have become a substitute for saving. I think most of that has happened, not in a conscious way. I think we understand why that is happening. I don't think people have really been doing that in like a cautious way, but the wages haven't kept up with the rising costs of real estate, for example. So there's this great picture that I love where you see like a family with a car and a home, and like 2 or 3 children, in America in the mid 60s or the 70s, where they said like, okay, in the 70s, a teacher could be married to a woman who would stay at home with 2 children. They would drive a car. They would have a home where all the children would have their own room, and the teacher pay has gone up maybe 30%, just nominal numbers, right? But at home went up like 200 or 300%, basically. And so even if you subscribe to that picture or that ideal of how you could create, a family, is just not realistic anymore. So that some people call it a game. I'll use the word game for lack of a better word, but it's like a game that's been played with rules that are not for us. But it is the narrative that's been sold to us, right? And it's good that we are recording this at the time where, the market cap of Bitcoin is higher than that of silver. Because one of the other things that we've heard in our youth is, if you want things of value, you should store gold and silver. But that narrative changed. It's gold, Bitcoin, and silver, and eventually it's going to be Bitcoin and then gold and then silver. But I like to look at these developments kind of like through this lens. It feels like, we are always evolving, we're always moving forward. And we have to think about, okay, is this narrative that we've been told, is that still the way to do it, right? To go and move towards my future and build my life and build my family, etc. And I think we have to realize that is just not the case anymore for our generation, especially when you think about, all the debt that all the countries have. When you think about, my mother she's 65, she's almost retiring, and we've had discussions where, I shared, she's like, I'm just going to trust that the money is still there. And I said, well, I'm not really sure, but okay, we're going to see. But I know that money is definitely not there for us, for our generation. There is no pension. And anyway, the whole path to this debasement of the fiat currencies is only accelerating. So, if you're mid-30s and you want to plan your retirement in 30 years, like, how are you even going to do that? Like, how many units of dollars or euros do you need to actually live comfortably? And what does that even mean? So once you realize that the debasement of fiat currencies will only accelerate, and therefore it will make it harder for you to plan towards the, let's say, short-term future, 5-10 years, building a family, buying a house, all these things that I just mentioned, and like longer term, 25, 30, 35 years in order for you to actually retire. There's no real options except the hardest money or the hardest asset to ever exist, the ultimate savings technology that is Bitcoin. And like, I took that step really fast, but we can talk about why that is. But I think it's most important that people understand the problem that they have. And the problem that they have is, again, you cannot do what your parents or your grandparents did. And if you want to think about your retirement, you have to think about that in a totally different way than how they planned for it. And that moment is now in this age range, basically, because it is part of the path that you're creating towards your future.
Well, let's talk about it. Bitcoin is sitting somewhere around 106, 107,000. We're listening to rumors every single day about President Trump having a strategic Bitcoin reserve potentially on day one of his inauguration as president. We're hearing that there's a list of 20 or so countries around the world that are already working on their strategic reserves. So why is that? Why is Bitcoin the hardest form of money, and why is everyone so interested in it right now, especially as we look to 2025?
Yeah, why is Bitcoin the hardest money to ever exist? I think, this is a big question, of course. I think we have to kind of continue first this problem part, right? Okay, so why is fiat money losing its value? It's because it can be created infinitely, and that's what governments are doing. They are creating enormous deficits, so that is debt, and the productivity of the people is lacking behind. So there's not enough revenue of the state basically to pay for all the spending that they programmed, of course, like all the favors, all the stuff that they promise during election times. And so they have to create money in order to, do these things. Whether or not they do them efficiently, I think that's a whole different conversation. But the fact is that, what people need to realize is that a state doesn't produce anything. The only way for them to get revenue is tax from their citizens. And if the productivity of the citizens doesn't go up, i.e. they don't create more value, there's not more dollars being, let's keep dollars as an example, dollars being traded, or like countries buying things that are built in America, for example, then, well, they have to up the taxes, which is not a popular thing to do, of course, or they create money. So what they call that is the debt cycle, where eventually, now you see that in America, for example, Americans work like 3 days a week, and their income tax from 3 days a week is used to pay off interest on the national debt, not on the primary amount, right? But only on the interest, and expenses on the debt. The interest on the debt is now higher than the defense budget, for example. So this is this path dependency basically is it's kind of unstoppable. You cannot really change it. It's only accelerating. It's like you're paying off a new credit card, or an old credit card with a new credit card. And well, we see a lot of things like breaking down. I mean, we can talk about different things, but you see it in food, you see it in quality, you see it in, buildings, architecture, roads. I don't know, what's the example in America? A few billion for like 600 feet of road or something somewhere. Like the spending is out of control. There's unrest amongst people. There's only so much people can take in terms of taxes, regulation, and all these things. Inflation, to not forget inflation. And so we have a very loose money. It's soft money. It's very easy to create. It's easy to spend. And that's why we are also not savers anymore, right? That's why we live in a consumer society, where people rather consume on short-term pleasures and desires than to plan for the future that we just talked about, right? And if you have the opportunity to plan for the future, you also have the opportunity to build cool stuff, like stuff that, doesn't have to be cool. Cool is the wrong word, but like stuff that's not ephemeral, like quality stuff, or like certain architecture or whatever. Like a few weeks ago, I was in Antwerp in Belgium, and I was in a building that was created in 1552 or 1525. And I was standing outside looking at the plaque that says, 1525. And I was just thinking, like, what has been built the last 50 years that's going to stand here for another 500 years? Like it's there's probably nothing that has been built. So we see the effects of bad money, the broken incentives that it creates all around us, and the need for a hard money that will align our incentives again to build together. That's kind of how I see it. If you have a hard money as a reward for the work that you do, you have to deliver actual value in order to receive the reward. If you have a reward that can be infinitely created, then the incentive to create actual value isn't really there, because that your reward will be diluted after you receive it, over time. So this misalignment of incentives is now very clear, and we see it in everything. And once you realize that Bitcoin, understand that Bitcoin is the scarcest asset to ever exist, and it's the best way to store economic value, economic energy towards the future, then it's something that you need to own. And why are countries now paying attention? I think it's because big corporate entities are paying attention after lots of citizens, luckily, have been paying attention. Still, a lot of people are not paying attention, but I think, that's why we talk about stuff like this on the podcast. There's like this game theory, it's kind of like the gold rush that you had in America. Once people realize that there's a certain opportunity somewhere that is a better alternative to whatever they are using to store their wealth, whether that's, cash under the mattress, or homes or cars or art or whatever, whiskey. People even use that to invest in, etc. Once people realize that there's this new store of value asset that is superior to all of the others, then you have to have this. And of course, the primary characteristic of Bitcoin is that there's an absolute supply, and so there's not enough for everyone. And this is, I think, what kicks off this game theory between not only citizens and companies, but now eventually also countries.
Embrace the future of corporate finance with Acropolis, your strategic partner for a Bitcoin Treasury strategy. We're the experts your business needs. Acropolis offers trusted Bitcoin advisory. We provide you with an outsourced Bitcoin strategy officer, world-class research, an accretive financing team, and more, so you can navigate Bitcoin's market with confidence and acumen. Best-in-class custody with multi-institution custody. Eliminate the risk of loss while maintaining full control of real Bitcoin. Acropolis exclusively uses multi-institution custody as the safest and easiest way for businesses to hold Bitcoin. Bitcoin-only solutions. The Acropolis platform is designed for businesses of all sizes to seamlessly manage their Bitcoin treasury, and we focus solely on Bitcoin to offer you the most specialized services available. Adding Bitcoin to your balance sheet is just the beginning. With Acropolis, you're not just adopting Bitcoin, you're mastering its strategic use to create and maintain value for generations. Take the first step and start your corporate Bitcoin journey with Acropolis. Book your free consultation today at acropolistreasury.com/book and start implementing our proven strategies within days.
So, Bram, we're here at the end of December of 2024, and this year we've seen a lot of progress. If we look back on the year, we've had a halving, we've had the launch of the Bitcoin ETFs, we've broke through 100K Bitcoin price. We just recently saw MicroStrategy get included in the NASDAQ 100. We have seen Senator Loomis announce the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Bill, and we now have our first Bitcoin president who will be coming into his administration here in the next 50 days. I'm curious, what stands out to you as the most underrated win for the Bitcoin community in 2024? Perhaps it's none of those, perhaps it's something more subtle, but what's the most underrated win that we got this year in 2024?
I think it's still Trump winning, to be honest. Like, just this whole list that you said is really amazing. Actually, that's I haven't really thought about summarizing it like that, but that's really cool to hear. I still think it's Trump winning. I think, how I like to reflect on, us normal, somewhat, we are curious, but I think we figured out what Bitcoin is, and I always think like, I cannot imagine that the people whose job it is to figure this out have also not figured this out. Like that's, I don't know, maybe it's a way to humble myself or something. I don't know, or like to cope with that fact. But I mean, once you have to look at the US debt clock, usdebtclock.org. Just one time, look on the top left, how much is the debt? How much is the debt per citizen? How much is the debt per taxpayer? And then you look on the bottom right, and it's unfunded liabilities, which is over 200 trillion, like at one point, especially as I think, or well, I hope that it's my assumption, a new president, if you see that, or if your team sees that, at one point, the trust in and the attractiveness of your sovereign debt is just going to implode. Nobody's going to want to buy that anymore. And again, it's hard to predict, but this path is accelerating. And you see that there's places in the world where they are ditching the dollar. The BRICS bloc, I think, is interesting. They haven't really ditched it, but they are exploring, more and more working together, trading in alternative currencies, etc. So the dominance of the dollar is threatened, and so you have to think of a solution for that. Like, how do you regain trust? How do you grow back not grow back, but like, how do you protect the wealth that you can have in a country like the US, and how do you protect the dollar as a global reserve, as a global currency. And so, again, I cannot imagine that they don't know. I mean, when you hear Howard Lutnick talk, who's now, not the Treasury, but he's going to be Secretary of Commerce, he knows. Larry Fink knows. Like, all these people understand what this is, And so the fact that they are talking about the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the Lamas proposal so openly, I find fascinating, because then I'm thinking, okay, well, other people in other countries whose job it is to know about this stuff, they are paying attention. Like, you're literally saying, I'm going to sell some of my gold, which is also a big threat to other countries with a big gold reserve, and I'm going to buy some Bitcoin. Like, why would you say it like that in the open? As you said earlier, there are already 5-6 countries mining Bitcoin with government resources. There have to be countries that are already stacking. It's not a surprise that they don't tell everyone that they are stacking, because you want to keep, suppressing the price. In that sense, you don't want to be the cause of the price to explode upwards, because you're telling everyone that you're buying as a country. So I feel the effect of the Trump win and the very pro-Bitcoin stance, and like all the pro-Bitcoin cabinet members, I think it's over half that are really pro-Bitcoin, publicizing, the Lamas bill, etc. I think it's still underrated, because an executive order on day one of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which, again, the plan is to buy 1 million Bitcoin. We can have that in, 5 weeks from the day that we are recording. That's the start of the year, and I love the analogy that Safety Namus makes with Bitcoin and being gunpowder. If you are a country that has like spears and swords and crossbows and whatever, and then there's like guys landing on your beach and they have like muskets and gunpowder, and you're like, well, yeah, that gunpowder, I don't really believe in that gunpowder. Like, maybe it uses a lot of energy, like, and you're dead. You cannot ignore the gunpowder. That's how Safety Namus talks about it. And Bitcoin is like financial gunpowder. And we've heard Michael Saylor talk about it in a recent interview. He said, like, okay, but if we just sell part of the gold, we basically say that Bitcoin is on par with gold. But there are provable and verifiable characteristics that show you that Bitcoin is superior to gold. I think the only thing that's superior for gold is the narrative. It's been used for 5,000 years. Okay, that's true, but like all the other stuff is inferior to Bitcoin. When you say, okay, as the biggest gold holder in the world, we are going to sell some gold and buy this new thing, thereby, lowering the trust in gold, having your allies and your enemies scramble to maybe also sell their gold and get Bitcoin, or get Bitcoin, like that just thoughts around that are just super fascinating. Like, again, I cannot imagine that people are not paying attention. This week, we've seen former finance minister in Germany say that Germany should pay attention to Bitcoin. This finance minister was fired, by the way, 2 weeks ago because he wouldn't agree with a new deficit proposal. So that's interesting. There's going to be snap elections in Germany, and it seems like Bitcoin is going to be a topic today or yesterday as well. We had a French Euro Parliament member talk about Bitcoin and the probability of a US, strategic Bitcoin reserve. So yeah, stuff is moving, and eventually it's just very simple. It's very simple. It's just game theory. Okay, so if America buys this, I have two options. I can say America's crazy, or I buy it too. Even if I don't understand it, I need to buy it. And that's just how it works. So at least that's what I think.
We agree. What are your thoughts on the price movement this year? I think we're up roughly 150% on the year. Most people, including myself, are preparing for anywhere between $250,000 Bitcoin to million Bitcoin next year if this game theory that you're referring to does play out, which I believe it will. So what are your thoughts on this year's price performance and next year's?
Um, I am not really like a price guy because that's just not my background. Like I'm analytical, but I think in a different way. So I find it really hard to predict price. The funny thing is, when I got in 2013, yeah, we dreamed about 1,000, and then we dreamed about $10,000. And that already were big steps. And then like the 100K was like, oh my God, when we reach 100K. I always thought the internet is going to explode and faces are melting and all these things. And now it's not deafening silence, but it's definitely not what I thought it would be, back in 2013, 14, 15, which, yeah, I find interesting because the problems with regards to, the devaluation of the money have only grown. So, the problem that people have is way more present and palpable, and so it's really surprising to me that not more people are paying attention. I think that's one. So I also feel less than I would have thought back in 2013 now that we're at 100K plus, which I also think is interesting. But I think that's also part of just my understanding has grown, and for me it just feels like inevitable. I saw Bitcoin, or I still see Bitcoin. It's an experiment. It's either zero or it's the ultimate, what they say, black hole value. If it's the ultimate savings technology, as I think it is, then we're going to millions of dollars per Bitcoin. So that I now think we're not going to zero anymore. So we're going in that direction. I don't think there's a middle way outcome for Bitcoin. I don't think that exists. But with regards to the price, again, I'm not a analyst in that sense. But today I actually talked to a guy who manages part of a hedge fund, of a $20 billion hedge fund, and he says, well, if there's a day one strategic Bitcoin reserve, then 500K is real quick, and he told me that he believed it would be 1 million next year. And it's hard to judge the numbers, but eventually people will sell along the way, but they will sell to people that understand what this is, and those people won't ever sell anymore. And so I do think that is the cycle that we're in, is like, okay, if you sell now, and this was already true in 2014, 15, like the example I gave in the beginning, like I have less Bitcoin than I had before. But I think in this cycle, it's going to be really clear that anything that's going to be sold will be bought by people that truly understand what this is, and they will never sell. And that, I think, is a really interesting thought. Like I think the whole drawdowns, like the 80% drawdowns that I experienced 3 times, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. It's going, just looking at human psychology, there will probably be a drawdown, but that won't be more than 50%, I think. Which and I might be that it gets shorter, the cycles get shorter, because the price goes down. Some people will, leave because they think like, oh, it's over, and this thing sucks and blah blah. But people that understand it will buy it at these cheaper prices. So I think the busts will be less volatile and also shorter in time.
I think one really interesting point that you just kind of made me think about, and it's something that I talk a lot about with, and I'm trying to introduce Bitcoin to folks who've never really thought about the scarcity of the asset class, is yes, we have this finite supply of 21 million. So we have the most verifiably scarce asset that has ever existed in humanity, the only truly scarce asset. And what does that create? It creates holders who understand that do not want to part with the asset. So you have the most scarce asset, which then creates the most amount of hodl type of behavior, which only leads to increasing scarcity.
Yes.
of the supply of the asset. And so, and to your other point there about not really being, too emotional about passing the 100K point, I also had that experience where when it happened, I was kind of, okay, whatever. Once you really understand the asset, you're kind of like, well, this is just a fiat price that swings around on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Like one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin.
Exactly. Yes.
And a lot of people on the outside, they think that that's just something like Bitcoiners say as a mantra, and it doesn't mean anything. But when you really understand the asset, you really do start to think of it as your unit of account. You go from store of value, maybe you do some medium of exchange with Bitcoin and hot wallet, and then you get to this point where Bitcoin becomes your unit of account, and 100,000 Bitcoin versus 125,000 Bitcoin, it really is meaningless because you also have no intention to sell.
Yes.
And so I guess one other question that I had for you, because you've had the podcast and here we are talking about this recent run up. I'm curious if you're seeing in the metrics of the podcast, whether it's likes, follows, comments, is there certain metric activity that you see on the podcast that can tell you maybe ahead of the rest of the market when we're in kind of bull hysteria phase or when we're maybe still not bubbly?
Good question. I don't think I can see that for my podcast. I think I'm a bit more nuanced or maybe more philosophical than the general, crypto. Oh my God, it's going to 10 million type of people with the crazy thumbnails. My goal is to make long form, long tail content to create as many touch points as I can for millennials to, get them triggered or interested, from whatever angle it triggers them to study Bitcoin. So no, I don't really have an answer to that. I think it's picking up over time. That's something I also expected, but there's some videos that are about price do well. I think people are primarily interested in that. I think that's also the main marketing point for Bitcoin is still number go up, which is perfect. But to really get to a point where of I think how we are talking about it, once you getting to understanding it's a savings technology that you will never sell. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. Yeah, that just takes some time, and I just believe different people are triggered by different touch points, and my goal is to create as many of those as possible to hopefully help as many people as possible. So I see a small organic upticks, but nothing crazy yet. Maybe to go back to your previous question about or what you replied to, the absolute scarcity. The interesting thing is that, well, I look at it like the price is more like an exchange rate between two monies, because once you realize that, as you said, you're saving economic energy in a fiat money system, in a money that's being devalued all the time. And once you realize that there is another money system, it's parallel, it's not inside it, right? So it's a whole nother paradigm. There's this other money system that you can basically move to. It's a money system that cannot be diluted, that, each unit cannot be debased. That's where one Bitcoin comes from. One Bitcoin will forever be one Bitcoin. It will not become 0.3 Bitcoin as, the euro was 1 euro in 2000 and in 2020 it was 30 cents. Like that is something that cannot happen in Bitcoin. And once you realize that, and you move over to Bitcoin to store your economic energy there, that's where the savings technology part comes from that I mentioned before, then you will realize that you don't really have to do much. You literally just move. That's it. And when you look at the price, I call it an exchange rate between these two monies, basically. And when I discovered Bitcoin, you needed 300 dollar units to buy one Bitcoin. Now you need 107,000 units to buy one Bitcoin. And then it's just a really rational reflection or just question you ask yourself, like, okay, which one is the stronger money? And I think if you put them together like that, it becomes very, very clear. And I think then the next step, once you realize one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, okay, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin of a finite supply of Bitcoin, you realize that you need a part of that monetary network. Like you need to be part of it. And the only way to be part of it is to hold a portion of that. And surprisingly, that's been a good argument to orange pill people. A few weeks ago, I was in upstate New York with a guy I know. He didn't really have a lot of. He had some crypto, no Bitcoin. We had a really long conversation, all the philosophical stuff about Bitcoin, etc. And he was like, he was like, okay, I'm going to buy this and that. And then he was like, oh yeah, okay, so there's only 21 million. And he was thinking. And then I said, do you know how many millionaires there are in the world? And he said, no. I said, 57 million. And there's only 21 million Bitcoin. So not every millionaire can have a Bitcoin. And if you think about, this was before it was 100K, I said, if you have $1 million in cash, would you buy a magic internet coin for 100K? Would you spend 10% of your liquid wealth on a coin? And then he said, well, probably, but it's a difficult decision. And then I said, okay, but if the price goes higher and higher, like that decision becomes harder and harder, right? And so if you realize, or if you think about, 57 million millionaires in the world, only 21 million Bitcoin, of which, 4.5, 5-ish million are lost. So effectively we're at like 16.5, 17. If you have one Bitcoin, it's a very, very, very special thing to have, right? And then I asked him, like, do you speak to other millionaires a lot? And he's like, yeah, I know a ton. And then I said, what's fun that if you have one Bitcoin and you go to this guy and you're like, oh, that's a nice new Porsche, or G-Wagon or whatever. And then, but then you ask them, like, do you have a Bitcoin? And when they say no, you can say, well, I have one Bitcoin. And by the way, do you know how many millionaires there are in the world? And that was the moment where he looked at me and he was like, okay, we're going to buy it now. So it's really funny that we had like 90 minutes or 2 hours of conversation about all this philosophical stuff about like what is money and etc. And like the thing that did it was kind of like the ego argument. But it's similar to this number go up thing where I think like, yeah, once you realize that the absolute digital scarcity is enforced by the network, which is the entire point of Bitcoin, is that when you say one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, this will not be diluted. It's kind of like a promise of a system. And the whole idea of Bitcoin is that promise gets checked every 10 minutes. That's why it brings you more certainty, or it lowers your uncertainty towards the future, because you know that when you save in that money, that it will never be diluted towards the future. So yeah, that was a little rant. Sorry.
I think you're right. I think just being a whole coiner is increasingly becoming a high status type of thing.
It's more special than becoming a millionaire was in like our youth. Like when we thought of like, oh, you're a millionaire. Whoa. No, like one Bitcoin is insane.
It's verifiably more rare and will always be more rare than being a millionaire.
Yes.
Like you said, there's not even enough Bitcoin to go around for half the existing millionaires to own an entire Bitcoin. And to your point about like coming up with $100,000 of liquidity to buy a Bitcoin when you're still kind of unsure about the asset class, well, a lot of these existing millionaires actually have their net worths trapped in other assets that they can't easily liquidate anyway. So they don't necessarily even have $100,000 of liquid net worth to use to buy Bitcoin on a spot exchange.
Yeah. Like real estate, try to sell a house on a Sunday evening, So yeah, you're totally right. I like, it would be cool if we would have like more of these little points, like explaining why is it more special to have one Bitcoin than being a millionaire ever was when we grew up, right? Because probability-wise, it's easier to become a millionaire, apparently, because there's more than owning one Bitcoin, So it's just, I personally think that's pretty profound. But if you still think Bitcoin is a scam or a tulip bubble, this of course sounds ridiculous. What we are just saying, like, yeah, well, why would I want to have one of 21 million tulips in this Ponzi, So understanding Bitcoin is hard, and that's also why I think it's great that you guys also started this podcast. I think we should not stop talking about Bitcoin. We should even talk more about it, because I think it'll help everyone towards their future. So
That's what we do all day, every day. And I think, we're getting close to the end of our time here, but since at Acropolis, we're in the business of helping other businesses and corporations adopt Bitcoin treasury strategies, I want to ask you for all the millennial business owners out there, what would your pitch be to get them to start thinking hard about adopting a Bitcoin treasury strategy?
I think it's similar to what I said about, creating time and space towards the future. If you have a business that you are excited and passionate about and that's doing well, then you want that business to prosper towards the future. Maybe even you want to, give it to your children, or that your children take it over, etc. And so, just as with your life, to make sure that your business survives towards the future, you need to be able to save any excess revenue or any money that you would want to save in order to spend it later on your business, or at least, strengthen the capital that you have. Bitcoin is digital capital in that sense, that you can use in the future to build out and grow your business. So I don't think there's any different use case than using it for your personal life or your family. Again, it's about lowering the uncertainty towards the future. And I think if you're serious about your business, that is what you want to do.
Love it. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think here's a great time to wrap. Bram, really appreciate you for coming on. Give the folks where to follow you on X, various social platforms. Feel free to plug it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So people can follow me on X at BramK, so that's BRAMK, and they can find Bitcoin for Millennials on any podcasting platform and on YouTube.
How'd you get such a great username? That's first
I've been
name.
on Twitter for 15 years or something. I don't know. I actually got it from a guy who also has a K in his last name, and it was like his backup account because he used it as like his full name. And then, I just asked him, and then I got it. And then,
Nice.
So just being on Twitter for a long time, I think. Yeah.
Well, everyone go follow Bram, and looking forward to having you on again sometime in the future.
Awesome, guys. Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, bro.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. Quick reminder that New Foundations is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment, financial, or legal advice. Business owners, business operators, and those who are Bitcoin curious, let's connect. Visit acropolistreasury.com to learn more or to get in touch with our team.